views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hi, and welcome to OpenBXRX Tuesday, a weekly program providing you the latest information, resources, services, and community efforts taking place locally here in the Bronx and virtually. I'm your host, Sonyi Lopez, and today is Tuesday, August 3rd. Coming up, have you noticed smoke in the air and hazy skylines in New York City lately? We'll learn how recent and ongoing Western wildfires contribute to that smoke, thousands of miles away. Then, primary election results are finally in. Join us as we discuss New York City and Bronx election results and what to expect in the upcoming November 2nd general election with the city. After that, we'll learn why NYCHA residents rallied to hashtag Save Section 9 against the city's plan to solve the NYCHA crisis through Rat Pack and the Blueprint for Change, seeking to convert the entire public housing portfolio into private management by 2028. And student loan debt is at an all-time high of $1.7 trillion this year, increasing U.S. student debt by more than 100% over the past 10 years. We'll discuss this and more with financial advisor Jonathan Ortiz. So please stick around. OpenBXRX Tuesday starts now. Welcome to OpenBXRX Tuesday on BronxNet. I'm your host, Sonyi Lopez, and I'd like to invite you to get social with us at BronxNet TV on Instagram and Twitter, and BronxNet Community Television on Facebook. Large wildfires have been actively burning for weeks, and smoke from these fires have traveled thousands of miles, clouding New York City skies with haze, and that beautiful red sun we all saw in photographs is a sign of trouble, as those same smoke particles reach the atmosphere. Joining us now to share more about the recent and ongoing Western wildfires and how they're affecting us thousands of miles away is Sarah Rogowski, meteorologist and emergency response specialist at National Weather Service. Welcome, Sarah. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Of course. So to start, Sarah, where are these wildfires taking place currently?
We've had wildfires across the West. So far over the past couple of weeks, the most concentration of the wildfires is actually in parts of eastern Washington, especially in Idaho and western Montana. But we do have fires across the West getting into California, some large fires in Oregon and in Nevada, and even Utah as well. And those fires are continuing and starting to contribute to the smoke, even and all that smoke is starting to travel and continuing to travel across the country and get into the East Coast.
And how do the majority of these wildfires start, Sarah, if you can share?
Wildfires can start a lot of different ways. Recent and prolonged period of hot and dry conditions across the West, along with several record-breaking heat events from June and July, are all contributing to very efficient fire growth. That means the fires are able to spread and grow. We've got widespread severe to exceptional drought conditions, and we've had some thunderstorm activity, especially thunderstorms with very little rainfall. And that means that lightning can spark wildfires, and the gusty winds associated with the thunderstorms can spread those fires quickly.
Thank you for sharing, Sarah. So we've seen some dense smoke in the past weeks in New York City. For instance, just last week, I was driving on the Cross Bronx Expressway, and the smoke was incredibly dense. How common is it for smoke to travel so far into the east, and how exactly does it happen? I know a few of us are wondering here in New York City where this is coming from.
Really large fires can produce a lot of smoke, and that smoke can go pretty high in the atmosphere. When I say high in the atmosphere, I'm talking 30 to 40,000 feet. And that's able to get caught up by upper level winds and make that smoke travel and disperse for a pretty broad area. So we're seeing smoke impacts across the U.S. from the West Coast all the way to the East Coast. Most of the time, as it gets farther away from the source of the fire, you'll see some dispersion, so it won't be as thick. And that will result in those hazy skies that we've been seeing on the East Coast and we've been seeing across the country for the past few weeks.
Wow, that's incredible. Thank you for sharing and breaking that down, Sarah. So here in the Bronx in particular, we already deal with poor air quality issues and high asthma rates. So this is a huge cause for concern. Now, how dangerous is this traveling smoke for us? And does the impact dissipate as it gets further away from the source of the fire?
We will see dispersion as smoke travels, especially if it's going from the West Coast to the East Coast. There can be air quality alerts in effect or air quality advisories, and those are issued by air quality specialists and different departments within each state. And those give a lot more of the health impact. So depending on your local area, those advisories will have certain health alerts. Usually we recommend that people remain inside if they can, especially if they are more prone to health impacts from poor air quality, such as asthma. Try to stay inside. And you'll notice as you get outside in the smoke, maybe your eyes will feel a little bit more irritated, your throat will feel a little irritated. And that's a good sign. It's telling you that the air quality is not as good and I might feel some impacts from it.
Got it. Something else I read, Sarah, was something about PM 2.5. I'm sorry, I don't know too much about these scientific terms, but if you can just break down what that is and, how it affects us as well.
That's going to be more for air quality and health experts. For weather, that's definitely outside of our field, but you'll probably get some more information from your local health department.
Thank you for that. We'll definitely invite someone to follow up about this. So earlier I mentioned the sun's red tinge. While it was a source of amusement for plenty of people here in New York City, as I shared, so many people went out to take photographs and videos of the red sun and the red moon. Can you share why this is not a good sign and what the sun is trying to indicate?
Well, as we see that smoke travel across the country, you have more particulates in the air and it all reflects and refracts differently with the light. So when you're getting more smoke concentration, you'll see those colors reflect differently. And so you start getting those tints of red to the sun and the moon. And we're seeing that across the country as well. And depending on where you are, if you have a little bit more clear view of the sun or the moon, you'll see slightly different shading across the country.
And do we know how long this smoke will stick around in New York City?
As long as there are large fires in the West, you have the potential for smoke getting across the country. And depending on how strong those fires are, how much smoke they're producing, and the upper level winds, that can all have an influence as you get farther away from the fire. And local health, local impacts in your local fire and local weather as well. So we actually just got a little bit of clearing in Utah for a day in between the next probably round of smoke as we go in our local area. And just a tiny small impact from the smoke, but we do notice day-to-day changes.
And Sarah, you can break down how this also contributes to the current climate emergency in our world. Really, I know a lot of folks, are not familiar with all the things that are happening in the world in terms of, water shortage, as well as just weather. How it's affecting us. If you could just break that down as well.
So across the West, we're seeing record-breaking heat. We are seeing severe to extreme drought that's been going on for a long time. We've had a very hot and dry summer already, and all of that's contributing to the increased fire weather and wildfire activity. We're expecting warmer than normal temperatures and below normal precipitation across the West and the Northwest through the remainder of the summer, and also looking at below normal precipitation, especially across the Northwest through the remainder of the summer. Now, while it's not possible to tie a single event or even a single series of events, we're noticing that the research is showing that these events are becoming more likely and becoming more extreme, have the potential to become more prolonged. So it's expecting to be an active summer, especially according to the National Interagency Fire Center, who's predicting increased fire weather activity for the rest of the season.
Oh, wow. So there's seasonal fires as well, Sarah. There's something called, I guess, just a season of fires happening. Does it normally happen this way every year, or, how does it work?
So across the West, summer is our wildfire season. That's where we're typically hotter, drier, have those potential for drier thunderstorms. So this is our fire weather season, similar to the severe weather season of the Central Plains or hurricane season along the Gulf and East Coasts. What we are going to continue to see, though, we saw earlier than normal activity this summer when it came to wildfires. It's already getting out more wildfire activity. So with the National Interagency Fire Center already predicting increased fire weather activity through the remainder of the season, it's going to be a little bit longer of a season than we've seen, and probably expect more fires, more smoke, and see those effects continue getting across the country.
I've seen a fire in particular, in news media. It's called the bootleg fire. Which fire is this, and where is this one located?
The bootleg fire is located in Oregon, and that's been one of the stronger fires. It's making its own records. It's one of the top few strongest fires that Oregon has seen. And that fire has resulted in very, very high smoke activity. And those, with that fire being very intense, the smoke can get very high. So that we've seen images through the summer, especially satellite images showing where that fire is located and watching the smoke plumes spread across the country. And that's one of the results of these very strong and very intense fires.
Sarah, do you have any notes for emergency preparedness? How can we stay safe and also prepare for anything coming up?
So if you're in a fire area that could typically have a defensible space, kind of clear away some of the brush from your immediate property immediately next to your home. You want to have an emergency plan, just like you do for hurricane season. You can have one for fire season because you have a much shorter time period to get ready to go. Hurricane gives you a few days usually, whereas a fire can be almost immediate. Need to get out now. Pay attention to local authorities when it comes to fire safety, when to evacuate, especially out west, but we can see wildfires in other places beyond the west. Try to keep your preparedness. You can go to weather.gov, and we have safety sites for each different type of weather hazard. So we have it for wildfires, for severe weather, for fog. You can help your family make a plan to stay safe. Have that plan ready early before you need it so that you're ready to enact it if you have to.
Absolutely. Super important to have prevention and preparedness methods in place. Thank you so much for that, Sarah. Before we go, NOAA, in partnership with Environmental Protection Agency, or the EPA, issues daily air quality forecast guidance to help us navigate poor air quality. Can you share best practices to protect ourselves at this time? And again, share those resources with us.
So when you start looking at weather.gov, you can find air quality forecasts. And we're using computer models along with observations and air quality experts to get that information out, tell you when it's going to be the worst, when it's looking to be better. It helps give you the message where if you are more at risk with your own health concerns, what kind of more safe, such as if you need to stay indoors, and keep an eye out for when the conditions could be worse versus better.
Thank you so much for your time today and your expertise, Sarah. We really appreciate you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Sarah Rogowski is a meteorologist and emergency response specialist at National Weather Service. We'll be right back here on Open BXRX Tuesday.
We know that people are dealing with the health crisis, but there's also a lot of food insecurity.
We're giving out healthy food options, and that's what's key here.
If you're a senior, you have a disability, they'll actually deliver meals to you.
The residents are anxious, they're worried, they're scared, they want to be tested.
When things were happening in our community, and we couldn't get the help.
There's almost a presumption of criminality that attaches to your skin color.
The site will prioritize those who are at highest risk in the population.
If you feel symptoms and you'd like to visit one of these COVID-19 testing sites here in the Bronx, you may call the State Health Department's hotline.
Important to note about this site is no reservations are needed. This is a walk-in clinic.
A lot of us are out of work and looking for something to do.
We have the machinery and the skills to make large scales of these masks and gowns.
Take care of your people. It's going to go way further than we actually can understand.
Right now, employees like myself are just adjusting to the new reality.
Reporting from Bronx, this is Allison.
Welcome back. Primary election results are finally in, and the city has been keeping us informed all along the way. Joining us now to share New York City and Bronx results and what to expect in this upcoming general election on November 2nd are Claudia Irizarry Aponte, Bronx reporter, and Allison Dikanovic, engagement reporter from the city. Welcome, ladies. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us.
Of course. So first, I just want to quickly shine a light on the incredible election coverage at the city and all the wonderful tools, surveys, and resources you all shared throughout this pretty hectic election season. So thank you for that. You know, I love Meet Your Mayor, and I love collaborating with the city at Bronx for Voter Fest. It was so fun. Can you share how the city kept New Yorkers informed leading up to the primaries and how that went for you all?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. So we really wanted to make sure that our coverage was making it easier for voters to navigate such an overwhelming and important election. So we started by asking readers what questions they had about the election months leading up. So we had heard from about over 6,000 New Yorkers about what questions they had, things that they were confused about, things they wanted to know about the voting process, the candidates, that kind of thing. And we used what we were hearing from readers to write newsletters and explainers and to create tools like Meet Your Mayor to help voters figure out how to participate. And then also as an effort to try to really engage and include as many voters as possible, we partnered with amazing organizations like BronxNet and others to host a series of outdoor events throughout June to bring voting information directly to neighborhoods.
Thank you so much for that, Allison. I thought it was incredible work. I definitely, leveraged some of those tools you shared at the city before I went into the ballots, into the poll site. So thank you for that. So going into the election results, Brooklyn BP Eric Adams won the Democratic nominee for mayor, as we know, and Bronx Councilmember Vanessa Gibson won for borough president. Can you share more about the primary election results in New York City and here in the Bronx?
Yeah, absolutely. Vanessa Gibson won pretty decisively in the Bronx Borough President election. She had a pretty strong showing on election night and continued to hold her lead throughout all the rounds of ranked choice voting. And once the absentee ballots came in, I think this is pretty much due to the fact that, that she, as a candidate, really prioritized being out, on the beat, talking to voters and, sharing masks, and distributing food and just doing all of these things that really show that she's out in the district at her election victory watch party on election night. I spoke with someone who was a volunteer in her campaign, and she said it was the very first time she had ever volunteered for any campaign ever. And she did it because, Vanessa Gibson had helped her, her school. She was a PTA mom, secure food and masks and supplies to the kids at her school and her own children. And that clearly, that strategy really translated to vote. Vanessa Gibson now the first woman to lead the borough presidency of the Bronx, the first non-Latino of any gender to be Bronx borough president in close to 30, 40 years. Clearly, a big change in the Bronx. And personally, I think that her engagement with the community, really helped her secure victory last month.
A historical nomination indeed. Thanks for sharing, Claudia. And Vanessa Gibson is no stranger to our show. She's a regular here, so I can concur that she's really active in the community. Thanks for sharing. So Allison, the primary took place on June 22nd, and these results didn't come in until an entire month later. And that's something the city shared via newsletters and also articles. What exactly took so long, and what happened at the Board of Elections?
Yeah, thanks, Sonyi. It was a little bit of a confusing process, but actually a lot of the delay in the timeline for counting votes was expected, and just something that maybe voters weren't as prepared for. But because this year with the pandemic, anyone could vote absentee in New York, so there were a lot more people who requested to vote by mail and to vote absentee, and enough people who chose to vote that way that those numbers could really impact the election results. So what happens in New York is there's a waiting period of time when there's a certain length of time that absentee ballots have to get to the Board of Elections after Election Day. It's a week, and then after that point, if someone made some kind of minor error on their ballot or something like that, they forgot to sign the envelope, there's another period of time where they can correct their ballot and send it back. So all those different like protections put in to make sure that every vote is counted takes a number of weeks. And so there was kind of this holdup of when the absentee ballots would get to be added to the total, which could impact the final numbers. And so that was later. But what had happened that was confusing, that really threw a lot of voters, was the Board of Elections decided to release like partial results early. And so they were unofficial results that didn't have all of the ballots, like all of the absentee ballots counted. They just were like the ballots that had been counted so far. And when they released those results, they made an error where they accidentally counted a bunch, like over 130,000 ballots that were test ballots. So they had to correct the results. And so it was basically like needing to correct the results and having unofficial results before the official results. That just was a little bit confusing to people. But the length of time itself was really protections that were put in to make sure that every ballot was counted.
Oh, that is definitely a big fumble. Thanks for sharing, Allison. So I wonder, did ranked choice voting factor into that extensive count as well? I know the city spoke with experts about whether it worked well here in New York. What did you find? How did RCV fare up this primary election?
Yeah, so as far as the results, ranked choice voting affected that because in order to win in a ranked choice voting election, you need to get at least 50% of the votes. And that's tallied through the rounds that they run with the ranked choice. So usually in a normal election without ranked choice voting, on election night, with the unofficial results, you can get an idea of who won because they don't need to have the majority. It's just like who had the most votes. But in a ranked choice election, it needs to be who gets to 50%. And that's harder to calculate until you have all of the votes. So that's why the ranked choice voting made it harder to tell who won on election night. But as far as how ranked choice voting went, a lot of voters seemed to really like it. There was a survey that they did, and it was like nearly 80% of voters said they understood ranked choice voting really well. 95% of voters said they found their ballot simple to complete. And voter turnout increased throughout the city by almost 30%. And so that shows that there were people who were concerned that ranked choice voting would make it too confusing and would prevent people from voting, which maybe happened for some people, but overall the numbers don't really show that.
Well, that's awesome news. Thanks for sharing that as well. I know a lot of people had these nerves worked up until the primary election when it came to RCV, but all that outreach that was going on and all that, all the education we received before the primary really helped a lot of folks try to kind of hone down on what ranked choice voting really was and how it worked. So Claudia, it's not over yet, is it? We have an upcoming general election on November 2nd. Can you share more about this upcoming race and what the biggest contested races are that we should look out for?
Of course. In terms of the general election in November, when Democrats will face Republicans on the general election ballot. In terms of local races in the Bronx, there's less to look at. I mean, we're talking about the Bronx as the bluest, i.e. the most Democratic county in the entire country. So not really a hotbed for competitive primary races, general election races, as we see in some parts of Queens specifically, and of course in Staten Island. But of course there is the mayoral election to look forward to when Democrat Eric Adams will face Republican Curtis Sliwa, co-founder of the Guardian Angels. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on in terms of November. But I think that we can expect if pretty much all of the Democratic nominees for city council and other local races for borough president to be elected in November and to serve starting in January.
Gotcha. Thank you. So we also do have important ballot measures to vote on, including redistricting and the environment and more. First, can you help us define what exactly ballot measures are and share what some of those questions that we should expect on the back of our ballot?
Yeah, so ballot measures are something that the state legislature can choose to put on the ballot. And basically it's giving voters a chance to have a say in making a change to the state's constitution. So there's certain changes that the legislature can't make on their own because it's written into New York's constitution. And so a ballot measure gives voters the chance to say, like, yes, we want the state to be able to make this change. So one example of that is having same-day voter registration. So right now, New Yorkers can't register to vote on the same day of an election, and our leaders in Albany can't make that change just by passing a law. That has to be a change in the Constitution. So one of the ballot measures that voters will get to vote on in November is saying, like, yes, we want the legislature to have permission to put in same-day registration, or no, we don't think that they should. Another ballot measure that voters get to weigh in on is a right to a clean environment. So that would be putting a change in the state's constitution to say that all New Yorkers have a right to clean air, clean water, and a healthy environment. And I think that the changes that would lead to are still unknown, but it would make it like an official part of New York's constitution that is something that the state is promising all of its residents.
Wow. I mean, these sound like game changers, and we have the power of our votes to make these changes happen come November 2nd. Thank you, ladies, for joining us today. Before we go, how can we stay in the know with the city? Please provide any social media, websites, etc.
Yeah, totally. You can find us on our website. It's thecity.nyc. And then on social, so on Twitter and on Instagram especially, we are at thecityny.
Perfect. Thank you, Allison and Claudia from the city, for joining us today and sharing more about New York City and Bronx election results.
Thank you so much, Sonyi.
Of course. Well, we're taking a quick break here on OpenBXRX Tuesday. We'll be right back. Welcome back. The city has put forth several plans they say will solve the NYCHA crisis. RAD Pact and the Blueprint for Change seeks to convert the entire public housing portfolio into private management by 2028. But many NYCHA residents have continued to rally against these plans and propose alternatives to fixing public housing in the city. Joining us now to discuss is Ramona Ferreyra, NYCHA resident and organizer of tenant initiative Save Section 9. Welcome, Ramona. Always nice seeing you.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Claro. So to start, can you tell us about Save Section 9 and your mission?
So Save Section 9 is a collaboration between a few organizations and tenants from public housing. So we include Sunrise NYC, the Movement School, which came out of the AOC campaign, Justice for All out of Queens, and CAV is an organization that organizes Asian tenants in public housing. So we decided to start talking about this from the perspective of saving Section 9 and not saving NYCHA, because what we are passionate about is Section 9 funding, not specifically NYCHA as a management company.
Got you. And if we can actually define, the difference between Section 8 and Section 9 in public housing, can you help us walk through that?
So this is actually something that goes back to the 1980s and is directly linked to racism. So when Reagan was running for president, he decided to cut back on funding to Section 9, which represents public housing all across America. So at this point, we have about 500,000 units of public housing spread out throughout the USA. Since the 80s, the story of the welfare queen, assumptions that Black and brown people that lived in public housing were just lazy and were, mooching off the system and taking advantage, convinced, Republicans to cut back the funding to Section 9 and instead start supporting private developers or private management companies through Section 8. So traditional Section 8 gives a family a voucher, and the family goes around knocking and trying to find an apartment, and they have a certain amount of their rent paid. Section 9 comes directly from Congress to public housing authorities. And it's the same discount program, which is why we argue that instead of, supporting Section 8, which is more expensive than Section 9, that Congress should return funding to what it used to be on the Section 9 side.
So let's elaborate on that privatization of NYCHA. Before we get into any specifics, why are so many residents against privatization? How does this put Section 9 at risk?
So for us, we feel that it is a strategic decision, right, for Congress and HUD to not support housing that primarily serves people of color. And Section 9 is something that we believe can be funded at the right levels to make sure that all of our public housing across the U.S. is, preserved. Section 8, as it's being used by public housing in many different authorities, and including in NYCHA, what they do is they issue tenant protection vouchers. And it's really important for folks to understand that that Section 8 voucher is attached to your apartment, not to you and your family. So you can't get some paper, from NYCHA that says, I have Section 8. Your apartment is receiving the funding. And the reason that NYCHA wants to do this is because specifically in the blueprint, they can then take the money coming from the government and invest that, because these private banks, which are going to back the blueprint and be members of the trust, they are interested in doubling that money as quickly as possible. So Section 8 takes away a lot of the rights that tenants currently have. So we have a right to organize and to ask questions regarding the management of our development. And we're protected to do that. If you're renting from a private, management company, you don't have the right to go to them and ask them for some sort of explanation as to what is happening in your apartment and in your building, unless you own, in a co-op or a condo.
Speaking of organizing, as a social entrepreneur, you actually organize in your current housing development. If you can share which housing development that is, and what are some of the challenges that you and other residents face, especially during the pandemic?
Yeah, so, recently there was a story published proving that NYCHA chose to ignore warnings regarding our ventilation system. And Mitchell Houses, where I am here in the South Bronx, it's been placed in the top 10 developments when it came to infection rates and death of people suffering from COVID. So at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, I tried to, as much as possible, support tenants in getting face masks. So we had gathered face masks and we gave out face masks to our entire development. And we also tried to educate folks about the dangers of the blueprint, because the blueprint was announced last year to us, right? So in the summer, when we're just catching a break and COVID has finally calmed down and so many of our families, friends and neighbors had passed away, we had to launch a campaign last August to fight the blueprint through education and tenant engagement.
And if you can just, guide us through, what the blueprint is. So as we read, the New York Housing Authority's website describes the blueprint for change as a set of ideas that evaluate where to invest capital toward renovations of NYCHA properties. But, residents like yourself say that the blueprint means an end to public housing. Can you just share more about this and where the blueprint currently stands in Albany?
So the reason why we say that it's going to kill public housing in New York City is because according to the congressional definition for public housing, you must be in Section 9 in order to be considered public housing. And that's key, right? Because as Greg Russ and NYCHA officials are walking around telling us that public housing will remain public here in New York because NYCHA will maintain the management of the operations day to day, that in itself does not meet the definition required by Congress and HUD. So the minute that we shift our funding stream from Section 9 to Section 8, you're no longer considered public housing. Now, the blueprint in December had a hearing and many people participated, and every tenant and the chair of Citywide Councils of Presidents, Danny Barber, we expressed that we were not going to accept any plan that moved us out of Section 9. And we especially don't want to move into a plan that is not Section 9 and have NYCHA manage us, because NYCHA has demonstrated time and time again that they don't have the capacity to manage public housing. So in December, we were able to kill the bill, and it was pulled and not presented in Albany for actual voting, right? So it didn't go through committees in Albany. Then this spring, at the end of the legislative calendar, a week before, they asked two senators, Senator Kavanaugh and Representative Simbowitz, to reintroduce the bill with some changes that they thought were going to appease elected officials, but did not appease us, the tenants. And the main change that they made was that they treated this like a pilot program. So instead of doing 120,000 units, they wanted to start with 25,000. And there's a danger in that, because having that pilot is exactly how they started RAD and PACT. And if folks are starting to pay attention to the number of units that we're losing, a real good way to measure how much public housing we've lost in New York is that when you looked at news articles or anyone talked about public housing, they always said, we have 600,000 people living in public housing. This was the quote. If we look at the quotes now, it's 400,000. So that means that in the last year, under Greg Russ's leadership, we've lost 200,000 units.
To RAD PACT, correct?
To RAD and PACT.
Got you. And just to explain to our viewers, RAD PACT is a program which takes private dollars to, fix previously NYCHA managed residences. So NYCHA still owns the building, but they don't manage it, correct, Ramona?
Yes. So a private management company is given a lease for 99 years. And it's also important for us to take note that is 99 years, which is to us de facto privatization, because none of us is going to be here in 99 years, and none of us is going to be able to advocate that whatever buildings have been turned into RAD or PACT be returned to Section 9. There's also no path back to Section 9. So Betances houses here in the South Bronx converted to RAD and PACT. There is no process or system established in the legislation that put RAD and PACT forward for Betances or any other development to say, you know what, this isn't working for us. We don't want this management company. We want to go back to Section 9. So once you take it, you're stuck in this limbo of being managed by a private developer and then also losing all of the federal rights that you had guaranteed under Section 9. And 964 specifically, which is the one that supports tenants and education, supposed to do outreach, provide resources, and help us actually move out of public housing and into the middle income families, right? So that is something that folks aren't being told, right? Like if you choose this program and something goes wrong with your manager and you're RAD or PACT, you can call your management and then you're gonna have to call NYCHA, and NYCHA will act like you no longer exist. The blueprint is more dangerous because the blueprint takes the funding that our tax dollars are basically supporting and gives it to the stock market in order to be able to produce additional wealth for members of the trust.
So, Ramona, question, if RAD and PACT isn't the solution and the blueprint is out of question, what is the most ideal solution that puts NYCHA residents first?
So the easiest solution is that our congressional representatives start funding Section 9. It's literally moving the budget so that it supports public housing instead of enriching private management companies. The second solution would be for us to explore the ways that NYCHA is mismanaging its funding and also not creating revenue streams. So recently we saw that NYCHA is not using its retail spaces. We have hundreds of thousands of square feet available that could be rented, that could be used, that could be producing income. And then finally, I would say the legislation that's being introduced by Maxine Wright, by Nydia Velázquez, and Chuck Schumer addresses the financial needs of NYCHA. What I find most interesting, though, is that once they pulled the legislation this June, they said that if they do get the funding from Congress and Senate, once that $40 billion comes in, they still want to pursue RAD Pact and the blueprint. And there is no need to do that, right? So that's a question that I think every NYCHA tenant needs to be asking themselves is, why is it that Chuck Schumer is visiting multiple developments in New York City, going out and talking to tenants, hearing from tenants that we don't want the blueprint, RAD, or Pact, but NYCHA is not next to him as he does this, right? If NYCHA truly needed the funding, they would be out there.
Right. That's very interesting. I wasn't aware that that was still going to happen. And I know that Chuck Schumer, Senator Chuck Schumer, and U.S. Representative Nydia Velázquez are asking for double the amount. So they're asking for $80 billion for public housing. And that's what you need, right? That's what NYCHA residents need. Before we go, Ramona, thank you so much for your time. How can people learn more about Safe Section 9 and, stay informed? There's so much going on when it comes to public housing at this time.
Yeah, definitely. So we want folks to communicate with their elected officials, let them know that you do not want to be moved from Section 9. And we want folks to start using Save Section 9 as a resource. So on our Facebook group, we have guides and toolkits that you can actually download and figure out how to participate in the campaign. We're regularly tweeting. So through me, Ramona the Mona, on either Instagram or on Twitter, you'll be able to see some of the tweets that will inform you. And finally, we ask that if any tenant is interested in having us at a teach-in or having us come out to Family Day and table, that's something that we're making available to them as well.
Sure. Thank you. Gracias, Ramona. Have a wonderful day, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks.
We'll be right back here on Open BXRX Tuesday. Struggling to afford your internet bills during the pandemic, there's a temporary government program that may be able to help. It's called the Emergency Broadband Benefit, and it provides up to $50 monthly discount on your broadband bill to qualifying households. Find more information about the program, including if you qualify and how to enroll, at fcc.gov/broadbandbenefit, or call toll-free at 833-511-0311. That's 833-511-0311.
built a media network for you.
BronxNet TV.
Come learn in your new state-of-the-art studios at Lehman College.
At Mercy College.
And coming soon to the South Bronx in the Hub.
Inspire with your stories, culture, history.
Your Bronx on BronxNet.
Engage with us.
Connect with us at your channels and at BronxNet.tv.
Learn, engage, inspire. BronxNet TV.
From the Bronx
to the world.
BronxNet.
Welcome back. Student loan debt is at an all-time high of $1.7 trillion this year, increasing U.S. student debt by more than 100% over the past 10 years. Joining us out to discuss this and more is Jonathan Ortiz, financial advisor. Welcome, Jonathan. Always nice seeing you.
Likewise, Sonyi. Thank you for inviting me to the show.
Claro. So let's get right into it with learning about your work in the community. Jonathan, how do you seek to help people through financial literacy, and what got you into this field?
Born and raised in the South Bronx, I've dedicated my life to improving the financial health of New Yorkers. My hope is to be a blessing to everyone with whom I cross paths with. Financial empowerment is a big deal to me. Family and community empowerment are even bigger. New York City schools lack it. Our parents don't understand it. And because of it, the future of New Yorkers and millions of other Americans is uncertain.
I know that's something that you advocate for is financial literacy in public schools. And I think that's an incredible initiative to have, something that I wish I had more knowledge of growing up. It's something that I've been, learning in my adult life. So, thank you for that and for advocating for that. And I hope that that's a reality.
Absolutely. I think when you're thinking about improving the community, when you're trying to change the Bronx, when you're trying to change the different pockets of poverty in our country, you have to attack them from the very beginning. And I think that starts in public schools.
Absolutely. So, Jonathan, right into it, the numbers are startling. According to an analysis of May 2021 census data, 1 in 8 Americans, or 12.9% of the Americans, have student loan debt. How did we get here?
Absolutely. Well, it starts with financial literacy. It starts with the lack of knowing what you're getting yourself into. It continues into political questions that are still unanswered. Why are people allowed to overborrow for schools? The same way that why are universities allowed to charge prices that are way over inflation? And these times, for someone to pay $40,000-$50,000 a year for education, and then for you to go to another university and pay a fraction of that, you need to really see what is it that you're being taught. What's the difference in networks that you're trying to be a part of, So yeah, I think it's a matter of that. It's a matter of overborrowing, people that are taking up a little bit more than they should. And also the fact that the federal government doesn't really cap as to how much money someone could borrow.
And Jonathan, have you been affected personally by student loan debt? Can you share?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, some of us are building from zero. We have no inheritance. We have no help. We have no connections. We just have hard work and hopes of real success. That's who we are. We're working hard and, to go to school, even if you have a program like HEOP or SEEK or EOP, depending on what level you are in school, it's an issue. It's, you still might have to borrow if you go to a private university, right? So yes, I did have to borrow, but, it's not just my personal, situation that I've had, with student loans, but it's the thousands of clients for whom I have data that say, hey, I am with you. I am having the same issue that you have had. And I want to fight for those people and hoping that we could correct this at some point.
Like so many systemic inequities that already affect people of color, and particularly, Bronx youth. I know that student loan debt disproportionately affects kids here, youth here trying to pursue a higher education to get, great careers as they're motivated to do in public school. What have you learned from working in the community about the impact of this huge issue on people of color and Bronxites in particular?
Our teachers love us. They have always loved us. I know that every single teacher I've had wanted us to go to school, get our education. Some of them wanted us to get out of the Bronx because back in those days, talking about 15, 20 years ago, and even now with everything that's happening, a lot of them are probably saying, hey, study and get out of here. I'm a believer in, going, getting your education, then coming back to your community and fixing it. But I think the biggest issue is that they did not correct us. They empowered us. Hey, they encouraged you to go to school, go to college, go get that degree, do well, do excellent. But they didn't tell us about student loan debt. They didn't tell us that we needed, to do well, to do finance, that there's something called student loans, and whether they're federal or they're private, that they're going to take away from your net worth if you're not able to pay them, with the income you're making when you come out of college.
Absolutely. And another thing, Jonathan, since March 2020, the student loan repayment pause enacted by the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act provided temporary relief by suspending all loan payments. I know that a lot of students and people that are overwhelmed with student debt were really relieved to have this, a little pause in the moment, but it's now set to expire at the end of September. What will this mean for those in debt?
Well, it means a lot of different things. I mean, for one, I don't believe it will expire then. I think that the economy, regardless of what the stock market says, it is not as robust as it seems, especially with the uncertainty of the Delta variant. And, right now, local governments, just a few moments ago, the CDC said that we might have to start masking up again, even whether you are vaccinated or not, indoors. And I really believe that President Biden will extend it or set in motion an ambitious plan to eliminate, reduce, the federal student loan debt. I mean, Senator Schumer is asking for it. Senator Warren from Massachusetts is asking for it. And Jonathan Ortiz from here in the Bronx is also asking for it. We need to do something about it. We need to eliminate or reduce it. And for once, have a solution to this monster.
Right. So another thing is Biden has canceled $3 billion in student loan debt so far. Is this a good sign? And could broad student loan forgiveness stem from this next?
That is my hope. That is the hope of many Americans who are in the know. For every financial counselor, for anyone that's in the business of improving the financial health of Americans, the hope is that he will do something. I don't think it's not about giving someone something for free. A lot of people are like, oh well, why should I use my taxpayer money to? This is a problem that, just like the housing market in 2008. It's definitely the next big thing, and if we don't answer it, this is definitely the next epidemic in the United States after the pandemic. Even if the pandemic passes, tomorrow, let's say, this America, when it's over, student loans are that epidemic that unless we come up with a solution, it's not going to be fixed. So I'm really hoping that they do fix it and that they come up with something fast.
Jonathan, as a financial advisor for a long time here in the Bronx, I know you've heard plenty of testimonies with students that have been affected by student loan debt. Can you share at least one or two testimonials with us?
Oh yeah, absolutely. People have lost their homes, because they haven't been able to pay off their student loan debt. I've had clients that didn't even have their bachelor's degrees and the government still lend them money. When you have a problem in the Bronx where, there's lack of housing, and the housing you do find is super expensive, right? Super, super expensive. You tell me, how are people making ends meet? I know plenty of students that are, that have overborrowed. And I've asked them, why are you doing this? Your college, your education was only like $20,000 over 4 years. Why did you put yourself in these shoes? And it was the need. It was the need and the opportunity for them to be able to borrow some money to pay off their rent. So again, it's socioeconomic issues that, that are affecting us. They're affecting the South Bronx. And I'm really hoping, again, it's not just about student loan debt, but it's housing. It's about having the basic necessities, right? The average student that went to school did it with the hopes of having a good paying job to be able to afford everyday necessities. It wasn't for the government to give them hand-me-downs, it was for them to be able to build their opportunities, right? That's why many immigrants, we're told to go to school. We're told. I'm Puerto Rican, by the way. Yeah, I got to mention that. My parents came here from Puerto Rico, and they said, Jonathan, you don't have to. Tú no tienes que trabajar en una finca. You don't have to work in a farm. We did it already. Your ancestors did it already. You're gonna go to school. You're gonna get your education. You're gonna be the family. The guy who gets us out. And a lot of us are still under that, that thought process, and we want to help our families. we don't want to live in housing. We don't want to, be asking for help. But the situation at hand is that we did the right things, but we're paying for them as if we did them wrong.
That is so true. And I'm glad that you made that connection, Jonathan, about, it's not just about student loan debt. It's also about housing. It's also about, what the future for our kids is. How much prosperity do we have moving forward in the future? Like how many youth that are in student loan, in debt right now can even afford to raise a family at this rate, It's very slim, the chances, no?
Absolutely. Many students, I call them kids. I guess I'm a little bit older now. But many students, you graduate and the hope is that you're going to be able to be self-sufficient, pay your own rent, build a family. But in the Bronx, and the same thing with many pockets in our country, we're not able to do it. Right now, we're overpriced. If you wanted to buy a house, houses are going for 800, 900, and on top of that, if you don't pay off your student loans, it messes up your credit. It damages your credit score and it hinders you from having a borrowing ability. So these are the types of things that credit hinders. Forgive me, not credit, student loans hinders. And not having affordable housing ownership. I think it's about time we have the opportunity to buy instead of being able to rent. We need our future to buy. Not only that, I also like linking financial health with mental health and physical health. And having the opportunity to have an environment that's it's sustainable, and all these different things, again, it comes full circle, and we need to at least start fixing them.
Yeah. Speaking of all those nuggets that you just dropped, you have a Financial Lit podcast here at BronxNet. How can we tune in? How can we learn more? Tell us more about this podcast.
Absolutely. The Financial Lit podcast is produced by BronxNet. You could tune in by tuning into Spotify or the Apple podcast world, and you can listen in. I've been blessed. I've been able to interview great people like Eric Adams, the Democratic nominee for mayor, Sean Donovan, and amongst others. And the show is growing, and we're interviewing more people. And if you want to be on it, just email me.
Wonderful. How can we also keep in touch with you, Jonathan, before we go?
Absolutely. Twitter, Instagram, Ortiz for New York. Simple as that.
Perfect. Always nice seeing you, Jonathan. Thank you so much for dropping by and talking more about this subject.
Thank you for having me, Sonyi.
Alrighty. Well, that's all for our show today. I'm your host, Sonyi Lopez, wishing you and your safety and wellness now and always. See you next time.